hearty welcome and happy Wednesday to one and all. This is episode 158 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you all for joining me on this kind of midday afternoon here in New York. If you end up checking out this episode on the YouTube channel, enjoy the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, and turn on those notifications. So here's a Gen X special for you. Today would have been the 70th birthday of a very important figure in a lot of Gen Xers, particularly people such as myself who were fans of pro wrestling and the WWF, as it was known at the time in particular. Roderick George Toombs. You might know him better as Roddy Piper. Was born April 17, 1954. It seems a little wacky to admit, but his attitude and his presentation in the WWF of the mid-1980s had a pretty big impact on me. I was the sort of kid, antisocial, difficulty getting along with others, difficulty resolving anger, difficulty making eye contact, difficulty. Always in a bad mood. I'm always getting the short end of it. I had no idea. I was wrong about all of that stuff. But I was convinced that I was right. I was an antagonistic personality. I had friends, but a lousy temper, and it was difficult for me to interact properly. I didn't make friends that easily. People had to go out of their way to be my friend. I couldn't have been that easy for anyone back then. But as a result of this, I always rooted for the bad guys in wrestling. I never rooted for Hulk Hogan. I hated Hulk Hogan, really hated him. But I always rooted against him. I don't know why. I liked him in the movie Rocky III. I had seen Rocky III before he ended up becoming WWF champ. You talk about one piece of pop culture having enormous influence on another piece of pop culture. Dare I say, if Sylvester Stallone hadn't been on board with casting Terry Gene Bollea, Hulk Hogan, as Thunderlips in Rocky III, Hulk Hogan's not becoming WWF champion and one of the true icons of wrestling, brother. Probably not. But he had charisma. Hogan had been a heel early in his career. Then they made him into what is known as a face, good guy. Then he famously became a heel. This crap out here represents these fans. This is a new world order of wrestling, brother. But Hogan, when he was a good guy, through that unbelievable run in the mid-80s from when he beat the Iron Sheik, USA versus Iran, come on. Or USA versus Russia, Nikolai Volkov. Hogan ran through everybody. Now, Roddy Piper, by the standards of how wrestlers looked in that time, guys like, Dwayne Johnson's father, Rocky Johnson, and Mr. USA, Tony Atlas, wrestlers who were just jacked, like the Road Warriors or the Missing Link, Paul Orndorff. Roddy Piper looked to me like a normal guy. Now, if we actually assess the Roddy Piper physique when he was in the late 20s, early 30s, by normal person standards, he was fucking huge. But standing next to the Hulkster, in the immortal words of many of us at Bev's gym, standing next to Hulk Hogan, this guy looked like he never touched a weight in his life. Standing next to the 24-inch pythons, brother. Roddy's 18 to 19-inch arms didn't look that impressive. So me thinking that wrestling was real My dad would always say, Jared, come on. What do you mean real? That yes, the guys can get hurt. Yes, they're great athletes. But it's scripted. It's choreographed. No, it's not. You don't know what you're talking about. Typical back and forth. I always rooted for Roddy Piper. And I remember in the run-up towards WrestleMania 1, it's so quaint to think that there was a time where in order to get tickets for an event such as, well, it wasn't called WrestleMania 1, it was just called WrestleMania. It's like Super Bowl 1 when they decided to change, well, we're not going to call it the title game, let's call it the Super Bowl. Well, if they did that, they wouldn't call it Super Bowl 1 necessarily. You just call it what the name is. So it wasn't called WrestleMania 1. The excitement was for WrestleMania. And they had this kind of storyline where Paul Orndorff, Roddy Piper were going to take on Hulk Hogan and Mr. T. And there's, again, Sylvester Stallone's influence, although I don't think that Stallone was at the first WrestleMania, or if he was, I never saw a picture of him. But Mr. T and Hulk Hogan co-starred in Rocky III. They never meet each other in the movie, but Mr. T plays Clubber Lang, the primary antagonist in the film, who nearly takes Rocky's head off in the first fight. And Hulk Hogan was sort of an antagonistic character, exhibition wrestling match with Rocky Balboa, and it doesn't go the way that you expect. But you had something called the Rock and Wrestling Connection on top of all that. And you had Cyndi Lauper, by virtue of the fact that Captain Lou Albano was in her music video for Girls Just Want to Have Fun, then Cyndi Lauper got involved in wrestling. And Roddy Piper just tuned her up, part of the act. But I thought it was real. I thought Roddy Piper was really beating the crap out of her manager. Dave Wolf was the guy's name. I thought all of this stuff really happened. So it comes to a head at the first WrestleMania. And I had seen Piper's Pit, Don Morocco, another huge, jacked guy, way bigger than Roddy Piper. Jimmy Superfly Snuka, another guy, massively built. And you got little Roderick George Toombs, only 230 pounds at maybe 10, 11% body fat. But by the standards of the day, he was kind of on the smaller side. Piper was magic on the mic. And it's something that would seem obvious, especially for that era, because they didn't have the megaphone like social media and going on to, whether it's Instagram, YouTube, TikTok, and kind of promoting your brand in that way. But just with print magazines, not that exciting, and the TV coverage, WrestleMania was an enormous event. For me, I wanted to go, well, for two reasons. One was to see the big match that I was just saying, Hogan and Mr. T versus Mr. Wonderful, Paul Orndorff and Roddy Piper. But also, my all-time number one hero, idol, Muhammad Ali, was going to be the so-called special guest referee for the main event. So my mom wasn't going to go into the city and wait on the overnight line outside the Madison Square Garden, because that's where the event was held at the world's most famous arena. She wasn't going to do that. Her plan was to just call. Whatever time they told you on TV, we'll start calling at 9 a.m. on February 8th. I don't know what day it was. Needless to say, my mom was not able to get tickets. I was devastated. But luckily, my cousin Ira worked in advertising, marketing. My mom says, well, maybe Ira can. Nah. Well, maybe. My mom calls our cousin Ira, who's related to my father, not my mother, for whatever that's worth. But Ira said, now, wait a minute. Yeah, I think I can help you. We actually have a block of tickets here. A bunch of the guys are going, but I think there's a few extra tickets. Let me just check it out. Sure enough, cousin Ira God bless him. People, he looked so much like my father, people thought they were brothers. The Cohen bloodline, very, very strong. But Cousin Ira, who was pretty young at the time, he was probably he was still in his 30s for sure. He got us 2 really good seats. We were, it would be the equivalent of like the 50-yard line in football. Our seats were directly, the middle of the ring was right in front of us, is a better way to describe it. We wouldn't have gotten seats anything like that. If Mom had gotten through, we would have been in the old blue section, the kind of nosebleed seats. We would have still been happy up there. But we were not far from the ring. And Ira didn't charge us. Whoever gave him the tickets owed him a favor. And I think because Grandpa Nat, Ira always says, your grandpa was my favorite uncle. Don't tell anybody. Oops. I think that's why he didn't ask my mom for any money. It's okay. But what he did tell us, don't bet on it. It's fake. Don't bet on it. It's fake. So WrestleMania, the first one, went off, and the card is okay. But as somebody who got to attend a lot of Madison Square Garden cards, like the regular once a month that they used to run, there were a lot of regular cards that were more entertaining and had better matches. And when we talk about someone being a good technical wrestler, the way I always interpreted it, and I think most people are in this ballpark, if the guys are really good, the match looks real. Whether or not it's choreographed, the moves are sold in such a way that they appear to be connecting. The suplex is done properly. The body slam looks like it hurts. The atomic drop looks like it hurts, et cetera, et cetera. So we couldn't really see that much because the last match was just a melange of everyone charging the ring. Bob Orton's over here, Ali's over there. Billy Martin, the former Yankee manager, was the special guest timekeeper. Liberace was over there at ringside. I mean, they had so many people there. It was unbelievable. Hogan and Mr. T ended up winning the match, and I was disappointed. But it was easier to stomach that than if the main event had been Roddy Piper versus Hulk Hogan. Hulk would have done the leg drop and gotten the pinfall, and I would have been more devastated. Thing that's interesting, though, I was such a fan of Rowdy Roddy. I liked him because he was despised, and he didn't seem to care if anyone or everyone hated him. He was almost ahead of the curve for what would later be the Attitude Era, where you had, for example, Steve Austin attempting to be a heel and the fans going berserk and cheering him. You can't guarantee who's going to cheer for who. There's nothing wrong with that. But when Roddy Piper at WrestleMania, I think it was in advance of WrestleMania 3, now that I'm thinking about it, because my mom and I went to WrestleMania 2. That was one that was held in 3 different arenas. We went to WrestleMania 2, the first chunk, which was Nassau Coliseum. The main event was a boxing match between Roddy Piper and Mr. T. Not really that great of an idea. And the match was not really that great either, unsurprisingly. The main event for that one in Los Angeles was King Kong Bundy, who they, had sort of ascended to the top of the mountain to take on Hogan. He wasn't going to beat Hogan. Come on. But by the time of WrestleMania 3, Roddy had become a good guy. He had become a face. And I still rooted for him. There were other times where wrestlers went from one to the other, and if they went from a bad guy to a good guy, I still, if they went from a bad guy to a good guy, I would be like, well, fuck this asshole. I don't like him. Roddy turned good, and I still rooted for him because of the charisma. Because he really wasn't that much different. His in-ring presentation, he fought a little cleaner. He didn't cheat as much. He didn't throw salt in somebody's eyes or do anything like that. He wrestled more like a good guy wrestler was supposed to wrestle. Or if we're fair, it's very difficult to tell the difference between Hulk Hogan's brawling in the mid-'80s versus the mid-'90s when he was the NWO. Hogan was not exactly the cleanest, most skilled technical wrestler. Whereas someone like Ric Flair, man, the stamina of some of these guys. You know, Roddy had matches in the 80s where it would go to a 45-minute or 1 hour time limit. Whether or not the matches are choreographed, or most of the moves or most of the bumps, each guy knows exactly what the other is going to do. How do you do that for an hour straight? See, that's something I didn't think of. The level of athleticism of most of the top end guys, the guys like Piper. Ric Flair and Barry Windham had about a dozen 1 hour where the time limit hit. They wrestled one match after another. They're in the ring for an hour. I mean, the endurance, extraordinary. But Piper, at WrestleMania 3, he wrestled Adrian Adonis. Now, Adrian Adonis was a tough guy from Brooklyn, like that was his persona. And then they completely turned him into adorable Adrian Adonis. And Roddy Piper he'd used the sleeper hold, had been his, it's basically like a UFC rear naked choke kind of thing. But Piper had used the sleeper hold, and then Adrian Adonis used a variation on the hold to win his matches. And so they had a feud, and Piper had been attacked by Adonis and injured, and this was a whole storyline. And then at WrestleMania 3, with the help of Brutus Beefcake, who made a turn from heel to face, in this moment, Beefcake comes to Piper's aid as he's probably going to lose the match. And then it was a haircut match was what it was. It's kind of ridiculous. But Beefcake helps Piper. Piper wins the match. That was about as excited as I ever got. Even though deep down I knew it was choreographed and it was scripted. I was still jumping up and down, and we ordered the pay-per-view. This was very early in the days of conventional pay-per-view. I went nuts. Now, I don't know if this part of the story is true, but Roddy Piper, when he was on Larry King in the late 1980s, promoting a movie, he said he met the filmmaker, John Carpenter, he of Halloween, among many great films, The Thing, and my favorite, Starman, and a very unusual, somewhat low-budget science fiction film called They Live, released in 1988. Roddy Piper said he met John Carpenter at WrestleMania 3. I don't know if that's true, but that was his telling of the story when he was on with Larry King promoting this movie, They Live. John Carpenter, as a filmmaker, is nothing if not unconventional and willing to take major risks, some audience alienation tactics, like he does in Escape from New York, where the main character of Snake Plissken is not really that good of a guy. He's presented in a much better light in the sequel, in my opinion. But Roddy Piper decided to take at least a temporary leave from the rigors of professional wrestling and make a movie. And I remember when They Live came out, the first wave of critics didn't really know what to make of it. And because it had a professional wrestler in the lead, and Roddy was like 31 or 32 at the time of filming, 32, 33 now that I'm thinking about it. Newsday thought it was a disaster. They gave it 1 star, said it was awful. Most of the New York papers trashed it. I didn't see it in theaters, but I rented it when it hit video early 1989. I thought it was good. Even as a 15-year-old kid, I understood this movie's trying something different. This is not a conventional sci-fi, the aliens are here, and let's just blow shit up real good. It was a little bit intellectual sci-fi. What if the aliens are not just here to kill us? Maybe they're here to do a very calm and gentlemanly version of an alien takeover. How about that? By using subliminal messaging to very subtly take control of us. It's pretty fucking good. And so I watched the movie and I told everybody, you got to see it. Roddy's amazing. There's a kind of a professional wrestling level scene where Roddy's character, John Nada, goes up against a great actor, Keith David, he of the unbelievably mellifluous speaking voice. They have a fight, an actual knockdown, drag-out fight during the movie where John Carpenter allowed Roddy, with his wrestling background, to choreograph the fight. And Roddy wins the fight with a belly-to-belly suplex. What? But it works. Now, honestly, I didn't do that much thinking about They Live other than this is a really good science fiction film. And Roddy had made a film with, I think his name is Sam Fatu. He had been known as the Tonga Kid in the WWF of that era. And Roddy made a movie with him and Dirk Benedict, who played Face on the A-Team, called Body Slam, where Roddy played, not surprisingly, professional wrestler. So to me, Roddy had made two really good movies. His film career just kind of came to a halt, though, because They Live wasn't successful enough for a big studio to take another chance. You know, they gave John Carpenter, because he was John Carpenter, give him a shot. Okay, well, it didn't make money. And around that time, I kind of lost interest in wrestling. I stopped watching WWF, the days of like the Red Rooster, and some of the gimmicks were just, come on. It was so absurd. I just couldn't really get into it anymore. But when I got to New York University, fall of 1994, I was in a class. Well, not the main class. What they used to do at film school is some of the classes we had lecture. And then another day during the week, we would have what was known as sections, where we would meet with a teaching assistant, mostly to go over what we were, the material that was covered in lecture. And if there were specific readings that we were supposed to have kind of handled and mastered the material. So we were discussing science fiction films. And I don't remember what movie we had watched. It might have been Blade Runner. You know something? I think it was Blade Runner, and I think the class was Language of Film. So this would have been the fall of 1994. And when we went, the sections were usually like maybe 10 or 12 students, because most of the lectures were a lot of students. We were going over, or I should say the teaching assistant, the adjunct faculty or adjunct professor, whatever you want to call him, we're going over some of his favorite science fiction films at the Hollywood level, because if you asked him independent, he was going to give you different answers. The Cafe Flesh, he was going to just give us those kinds of obscure answers. But when he was going over his favorite studio level science fiction films of the decade, he mentioned They Live. And I was shocked because, I liked the movie. I was a fan of Roddy Piper. But we're in academia here. This is not a wrestling fan saying, oh yeah, it kicked ass. This is someone who's about to get their doctorate. They Live? Really? Why, have you seen it? Well, yeah, I love that movie. Really? And then he stopped what he had been talking about the other films, and he spent the next 5 minutes explaining in academic terms why They Live, which was about 5 to 6 years old at the time, why it is the most underappreciated science fiction film of the last couple of decades. He explained it a lot better than I would have. But the fact that someone I grew up with, Roddy Piper, someone I kind of idolized, who became an actor, wasn't really trained, but for the requirements of what the role of John Nada was, he's actually really good. His line readings are on point. His timing is solid. And it does help that he has someone like Keith David, who is an absolute home run hitter, working with him. But Piper's performance, it's not bad. And I remember reading an academic paper around that time, also talking this movie up. This is a film that a lot of people slept on. We dismissed it because why is John Carpenter casting a professional wrestler in the lead? What is wrong with him? But he got a coherent performance out of the professional wrestler. And the fact that They Live is a movie that is beloved by so many people who don't even necessarily know who the lead actor is. Oh, Roddy Piper. They're not going to Google it. That's just who happens to be in the movie. We're not going to find out, oh my God, this guy was a huge star for decades in professional wrestling. Started as a bad guy and then mostly was a good guy for the remainder of his career. A little moments here as a heel, but he mostly was cheered. He mostly was beloved. And he never lacked for the charisma and he just extraordinary natural talent with a microphone in his hand in front of his face. Now, I kind of lost track of him as far as what he was up to, through the 2000s, because I didn't follow wrestling at all. Occasionally he would make appearances, I gather. And then I remember when Ronda Rousey came on the scene, the famous UFC women's, I think she was a bantamweight champion I'm not sure the division, but she dominated for quite some time. And her nickname was Rowdy, and it was a tribute to Roddy Piper. She was Rowdy Ronda Rousey, kind of roll off the tongue, as they say. I remember when Roddy died, he was only 61, and he'd had heart issues, and they said he passed from, it was his heart that did him in. And I imagine that a lot of pro wrestlers, the life expectancy would have to be cut short significantly because of the travel, the stress on the body, the stress on the mind and the soul. It's a very difficult life. I can't even imagine being on the road that much and getting beat around so much and having people say, well, it's just fake. What's so difficult about it? And have to deal with that kind of shit all the time. Famously, he was on with, not like the Bill Maher from 25 years ago. And he was really frustrated and aggravated because Bill Maher was among many millions of people that equated scripted and or choreographed with fake. And you could tell it pissed him off. Maher just happened to be the vessel for him getting angry, but clearly this was a conversation that he had had with hundreds of people. Maher just happened to be on the wrong end of it on TV. But it didn't seem to be at the end of the interview any hard feelings, but you could see he was legitimately pissed off because he'd heard it so many times. But when he passed, I was really sad. It came out of nowhere. Didn't know that he had been sick. And so I was left pondering those great moments on TV and getting to see him live at Nassau Coliseum in a boxing match with Mr. T. And at the first WrestleMania, literally in the ring with Muhammad Ali. Ali actually takes a swipe at him at one point. It's kind of one of the highlights of the match. But I remember a quote from Hot Rod, as he liked to be known. Hot Rod. Piper's Pit, his TV show that they had on, the wrestling program. I think it was Wrestling Challenge, or I'm not even sure what was the name of the show. It was one that Vince McMahon hosted. But Roddy Piper had a quote. It went something like this. I want to find a place that I can fill with peace. And if I can't do that, let's fill it with mayhem. And it fits him so perfectly. Roderick George Toombs, aka Roddy Piper, one of the great characters and most charismatic figures in the history of professional wrestling, born on this day, 1954. This has been episode 158 of the Confessions of a Not So Dangerous Mind podcast. I'd like to thank you for joining me on this midday Wednesday here in New York. If you caught this episode on the YouTube channel, enjoy the content, haven't done so already, please click like, subscribe, comment, share, turn on those notifications. Or if you catch this episode on the audio platforms such as Spotify or iTunes, same general rule applies. Click like, subscribe, share, turn on those notifications. I'll be back with episode 159 real soon. Till then, peace.